All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna Bennett, and I will be discussing finding the best fit, advising first generation students of color on making their best college decision. So this is a little bit of information about myself. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have worked in education for the past 7 years with K through 12 education with charter schools. And I've been working in Los Angeles, and the charter schools that we work with are in Southern California. Additionally, I've also volunteered as a college coach with Scholar Match over the past year, and I've organized many conferences for high school students and then also younger students regarding college access and also STEM education. And I'm involved with a couple of civil rights organizations such as the National Urban League and the Anti-Defamation League. And I graduated from San Diego State with my bachelor's degree in journalism, and I also have a master's degree from California State University Northridge in public administration. So this is the agenda of what we'll be looking at today. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box and I'll answer them at the end. And if there's for some reason I don't know the answer at this time, maybe I can collect your information and get back to you at a later time. So the first item that we will be discussing today is who is considered a first generation student of color. Then we'll be looking at ways that you can help your students find ways to fund their college education. Then we'll be looking at ways that you can help them explore majors that are out there. And then looking at the student affairs landscape on campus. And then finally, retention efforts, excuse me, for first generation students of color on college campuses. And then here are objectives and takeaways that you should be getting from this session. First, you should be able to identify like who are students of color and who are first generation students. And then secondly, assisting them to find the cost of college and ways to fund it. And then encouraging them to explore different majors that they're passionate about. And then identifying student organizations on campus that can help them grow. And then also finding out retention efforts as well. So my first question here is, who is considered a first generation student of color? So when you look at first gen students, these are students that come from families where neither their parent or guardian received a 4-year degree. And even if their parent or guardian went to a community college or a 2-year institution, they still are considered first gen. And students of color are those who, this is according to University of California State, UCSD, UC San Diego. So this is their definition, but it's basically students who identify as African-American, Mexican-American, Latinx, Asian, Native American, and a mix of these racial identities. So why is this demographic unique? So there are a few reasons why this demographic is unique, and these aren't all the reasons, these are just some of them. But for one, usually this demographic will enroll in community colleges, and they usually aren't represented as much at 4-year institutions. And you'll see a lot of times that English isn't their first language, and they also tend to be older students as well. So here are some challenges that first gen students face. So as with my experience with Scholar Match and being an advisor to students last year, these are some of the challenges that we came across. First thing is being overwhelmed by how much college costs. And we learned about this in the last session, like that can be, a really big determining factor for students not even going to a certain college because it's so costly. So that's one thing. Another thing is not understanding the financial aid documents. And that's confusing for anybody, but especially for this population because they might not have like anyone in the household that can really advise them or help them through the process. And that's where organizations like ourselves and the organizations that we come from, that's where we come into play. Another thing, and this is something that I've talked to a lot of people that I know, because I'm in my 30s now, and a lot of people that I know are in their 30s as well. It's like having that guilt of having upward mobility that their parents or guardians may never experience. And it's just feeling that guilt of, oh, I'm able to get ahead, but my mom and dad, they weren't able to do that as well. So that's something else that comes up. And then another thing is not being able to tour all the college campuses. So this is an experience that I had with my mentees last year, where there were colleges that they wanted to look at that were out of state, but because you might not have the financial means to get on an airplane or to have access to a car, you might not be able to go visit those universities. So that's something else also. Another big concern is falling through the cracks in college, like, knowing that, kind of that imposter syndrome and going into college and not basically getting into a situation where you feel like you're not seen. So that's something else that comes up. And then also not knowing where to begin in the college process. And again, that's where organizations like ourselves, like where we come into play, and we're able to help guide students along with their college counselors as well. So the next item I'll be discussing is funding college. So this is just a graph of information that I was able to obtain, and it just shows you the average cost of yearly college tuition for last academic year. And as you can see here, the in-state tuition, which is the fuchsia color, that's a lot less than your out-of-state and your private schools. But one thing that I did tell my mentees last year is that they should really consider private schools, even though it's more expensive. And that's what we learned a little bit about in our last session, because oftentimes there will be funding opportunities for them that they might not have known about otherwise, like scholarships, or I've seen a lot of Ivy League schools, they have incentives for students whose families make lower income. Once they get in, they might have full ride scholarships. So I told them, don't let that discourage you from applying to a private school. So what are some financial challenges? One main thing, and this is like that across the board for anybody, like their parents or guardians may not be able to contribute to their college education. And I know that that is like typically like the American dream when you have a family, you want to be able to pay for your child's education. But for a lot of students that are first gen and students of color, they might not be in that position. Another item that I came across last year advising students is some of them were undocumented. And in those cases, there might not be as much financial aid options for them. And there were some options because we were in California. So sometimes there might be more options depending on what state you live in, but that can be limiting as well. Another thing is sometimes students who are first gen, students of color, they have to financially support either if they have a child of their own, or also dependents in the household. So that's something else that can be get in the way as well in their college education. And then also not being able to know how to apply for financial aid or to know where to find scholarships. And that became something that I found that came up a lot last year when I was advising students, is that they didn't know where to find scholarships. And so I would send them different information that I found, and then from there they would apply. But those are just some challenges that they come across. So here are some ways to fund college. It's not always, but for one, family contribution. If you are fortunate, your family can contribute to that. And then some other options here are work study. You'll see that be a way that a lot of students apply or fund their college career or get a job. And that's where it can be kind of challenging if they get a full-time job, because then their college experience might be a little limited because they're working and they might not be able to take all the classes that they need to take at the time. Another thing here is scholarships, and of course loans and financial aid. So one tool that I really found that was very helpful when I was doing this research is that college websites and university websites, they have this tool called a net price calculator that is very helpful. So you can go onto their website and you can actually look to see how much it would cost for a student to attend that university in a particular year. And so I really am going to encourage the students that I advise this year to look at this, and we'll look at this together, because it really has been very beneficial to finding out like what it looks like on a yearly basis. So this is just an example of one of my alma maters where I went, San Diego State, and what it looks like. As you can see, it's approximately $20,000 in the 17-18 school year. So that was 2 years ago. And of course, that price has probably increased, but that's the data that we had access to at the time when I did this research. So that just kind of gives you a look at what the net price calculator might look like on a website. And then we're going to go to, and then this is Harvard. So as you can see, it's much higher. But again, as I've been telling my students that I work with, that even though it might be a higher amount, there might be more scholarships and there might be more opportunities for them to receive funding other ways because it's a private institution and there's more leeway than when it's a state institution. So I just want to ask you all a question. I'll give you guys a few minutes. What would you encourage your students to do, if you could put in the chat box, in terms of like finding ways to fund college or to look for ways to fund college? I'll give you guys a few minutes to look into that or to chat. Okay. Actually, you know, I'm so sorry. Okay, let's see if we have some chats. Let's see.
I will say that I think our chat will be able to be seen by all 130 some of us.
Oh, okay, okay. So yeah, I forgot that it's in a breakout room, so it's a little different. So if someone wants to unmute themselves, you can definitely, because we have time, you can definitely like say like, what are some ideas?
I will say the breakout rooms, actually the chat is just for the people who are here as well. So if you look at everyone, it's just there, just as like another helpful tip.
Thanks. Okay, so let's see. So someone said to apply for schools that provide 100% according to need, and then also looking at local scholarships. Okay, so that's great. Are there any other ideas that you guys have before we move on? Okay, all right, then we will move on from here. So here are some tips that I've come up with in terms of what you can do. Number one, utilize that net price calculator on the college websites. Another thing that I have told my students that I work with to do is to create a spreadsheet where they can list all of the different universities that they are applying to and then be able to compare and contrast like what the cost looks like, because it's much easier to look at it as a full picture versus just like individually one by one and not seeing the full picture of it. Another thing is learning how FAFSA works. And you know, that can be very tricky, especially in undergrad when you are depending on parents' information as well. And so that can be very tricky, coordinating with parents and making sure that you have all of that documentation together. And then lastly, researching scholarship opportunities, because there's many scholarship opportunities out there. And what I've told my mentees to do is that even if they don't fully like meet all the criteria, still try to apply anyway, because you don't know who else is applying and you might be able to get that scholarship. All right, I'm looking at is exploring majors. So working last year, most colleges will require students to declare majors. There are some that you can still do undeclared, but from our experience working together, they had to declare the major. Times they're unaware of all the majors that are out there, because when you're in high school, you hear about some majors, more popular majors like nursing or engineering or those type of majors, but you might not necessarily know of all the majors that might be similar to the one that you're looking at. So what I did was I told the students, we looked at their majors. One of them was nursing, the other wanted to be an urban planner. So we looked at majors that were similar to those and to see like if there were a university that they wanted to apply to, and they didn't offer those majors, or they were impacted, potentially look at declaring when they apply for college, because as we all know, you often will switch your major once you're in there. So I wanted them to look at the full picture, not just be so stuck on one major, because that could easily change once they enter into the university. Again, another thing is for first-gen students of color, oftentimes they will choose majors for upward mobility versus passion. And I know that based off of experience talking to many of my friends that were first gen and students of color, knowing now in our lives, like, you know, they might have a desire to change careers or to do, or they wish they would have declared another major. So I really encourage the students I work with to really look and see what they're passionate about, as well as like what could make money, because at the end of the day, they don't want to be stuck in their career and be stuck and not be able to move careers if they make a decision later on. So here are some questions that you can ask your students as you're working with them, just to help them to think more about the majors that they are declaring while they're in the application process. The first one is to look to see, like, as I mentioned, are they passionate about the major that they've chosen? So that's very important. Another thing is to look to see, like, if they're able to get a job once they graduate with that degree. That's very important, especially within our current economy. Just looking to see, like, basically seeing if they're able to use the major that they have gotten and a degree that they've gotten and be able to apply that into a different workings, like basically a different sector of work, like just deciding what they want to do with that. Another thing is applying the knowledge to their career, seeing like if they're able to get the knowledge from their major and to apply it to their dream career. One thing that I've come across a lot with the students I'm working with, and usually when we're working with the students, we end our work with them in June, but as an advisor, I've told my students, like, even though, you know, the program year is done, you can always reach out to me if you'd like. I could still provide guidance if you don't have someone to provide guidance to you in terms of figuring out like their course load. So with first gen students of color, oftentimes they don't have someone there to help them figure out like their scheduling. Sometimes they're able to go to different counselors, but oftentimes that's not the case. So there was one student that I was working with, and she was gonna take very tough science classes together. And I was just telling her, because I know based off of other people I know who've taken those classes, I just told her, you know, you might wanna think about changing the schedule around a little bit, because those are going to be really tough classes. So these are type of questions that they should be thinking about as they are scheduling their classes, if you're still talking to them at that time. And then another thing, as I mentioned before, if the university doesn't, like for my student that I was working with that was an urban planning major, I also pointed out, well, why don't you look into public administration or architecture? Those are similar majors, but and if like there's another university that you really want to go to and they offered those majors instead, then maybe you should declare those at that university. So just getting them to think more about the different options that they have. Look like them on campus, it really can make a difference. Of course, you have your fraternities and sororities, and then you have your mentorship programs and your honor societies. So these are just different examples of organizations that you'll find on campus. So the last topic, and I think we might end a little early depending on the questions, is just retention efforts that you should be looking at with your students as you are advising them. So what is student retention? So this is really important, and especially with this demographic, because it can make or break their college career in a sense. So retention basically is the ability of a college or university to carry out its mission. And so you have different categories of students. You have a stay or retain student, and those are students that will enroll and then they will stay throughout their 4 years and graduate. And then you have these other two categories, which many times the students of color and first gen students fall into, and it's because of life circumstances and because life is real. And one of them is a dropout or leaver, and that's when the student starts there, but they leave before graduation and may never return back to school. And then you have a slowdown, which is a student that goes full time and then it trickles down and they're only taking a few classes. And the reason why this happens a lot is because there might be family obligations or financial obligations where they might have to work full time and not take as many classes as before. And so these are things that really impact students. And what I can say is, like, at San Diego State, they had they had several organizations that really looked at retention efforts. One was the Student African American Brotherhood, SOB. And so basically what they did there is that they would really help to make sure that the Black males there, when they enrolled, that they stayed involved and that they would help each other with their classes and things like that and help them to graduate. So their real mission was retention for sure. And then what you'll see at PWIs, or predominantly white institutions, you'll have a lot of students that are Black, Latino, or Native American. They're more likely to have lower retention rates. And that can be because, again, they might not, I know, being a student of color going to a predominantly white institution, oftentimes when you don't see students that look like yourself, you might not feel like you belong and you might end up leaving if there isn't really an incentive for you to stay. So that's something else. And again, looking at financial obligations to families, that's another reason why sometimes students leave. So what are some efforts colleges are doing to make sure to retain first-gen students of color? Of course, you've heard of the Educational Opportunity Program, or EOP. They really have a great program where they have programs, they have like the Summer Bridge program, which allows students the summer before they attend college to actually stay on campus and to take classes. This year's different with COVID and everything, and it's just a different, very unprecedented year. But I do know that they have been doing a lot of online opportunities, talking to my students that I worked with last year through Scholar Match. And so I know that they've been doing a lot of online opportunities. Again, you also have your Office of Diversity Inclusion. And then one thing I really like that the University of California is doing is that they have this program where you have first generation college students partner with first generation faculty members. And so that really helps because these students are able to see faculty members and really successful faculty members that had their same experience, and they're able to talk to them and interact with them. So I think that's really great. Again, as I mentioned to you, high school conferences, that is something that a lot of universities have, and it's a way to increase diversity and to also help first-gen students and students of color give back to their communities. And so those are just some efforts that universities are doing. So what should first-gen students of color look at universities in terms of retention? Just looking to see like if the university has any efforts to help them to graduate, like looking to see, like, for example, like I mentioned with the University of California and having the mentorship program between the first-gen faculty members and also the first-gen students, seeing if there's anything like that at the university. Another thing is just to see like what student services that they have that are helping to ensure that students are graduating. And then lastly, are there any faculty or staff members there that can help them to focus on graduating? Normally, that is something that you won't know unless you know people that actually already attend the university. But like, for example, at San Diego State, we had a lot of faculty members that really helped to ensure that if a student had difficulties in classes or they weren't on the path to graduate, they were able to advise them and actually a lot of times advocate for them too. So you want to see like if there's anybody on the college campus that can assist with that, if possible. Okay, and then before I go into my recap, I just want to see if there are any questions on any of the information that I went over, and I'll give you guys a few minutes to ask those questions. Sorry, I'm just looking through the chat to see if there's any more questions. Okay, so someone asked a question about HBCUs. They said, I typically coach California students who don't know as much about HBCUs and also perceive them as really far away. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of students you encourage to take a closer look? That's actually a really great question, because I actually there are a lot of students that, because I live in Los Angeles, and a lot of the students that I work with happen to be Latino or Black. And so one thing that I know, there are a lot of great benefits about HBCUs. I have a lot of cousins that live in the South that actually attend HBCUs. One thing that I would encourage them to do is, or for ourselves as coaches, is just to talk to them a little bit about HBCUs or minority serving institutions, and just to bring up the websites and tell them a little bit more about them, because oftentimes, especially in California, we aren't aware of HBCUs as much because they're not really in our faces as it would be if we were in the South. But I know in Los Angeles, because I volunteered at one, we have an HBCU fair each year where students are able to connect with recruiters from HBCUs. And they're really great universities, because there's like a sense of community and sense of purpose, especially for students that are attending Morehouse and Spelman. And they're able to really get connected with their community and to be able to feel very empowered as well. So I would just bring up the websites and talk to them about the different websites. If you happen to know anybody who attended an HBCU, I think that that's a good step too, to have them talk to them about their HBCU experience and tell them, even if they are leaving and moving out of state, that we also have great technology nowadays where we can really stay in touch. So they shouldn't allow that to get in their way, and they should just look at the full picture of things. So another question is, do schools share their retention strategies and or first gen faculty, or do we need to ask for this kind of info? So you can actually find it on you kind of have to search a bit for it to look for this information, but I would just Google the school and then see plus retention, and because this is where I was able to find some information. And oftentimes the school will have their data on their website to show how who is graduating from there and what the demographics look like. So it's usually in the demographics section of things. So I would do that research first probably, and then advise your mentees or your students for what to look for there. So that's how I would do it. Another question is, how have you approached advising about predominantly white institutions to determining whether the campus will work for them? So for me, most of this, I think, because I've been an advisor for a year now with Scholar Match, and I went to PWI, so I know that experience very well, and being a person of color attending them. Basically, what I have done is I've told my 2 students that I advised last year to look at the university and also to look at the different student organizations on the campus, just to see if they feel like they'll be a good fit, and also to look at the surrounding community. I know growing up or going to college in San Diego, we thought there was going to be more diversity at San Diego State at the time, but there wasn't necessarily as much. But what was great was that there was a really strong community, and now they have more diversity than they did 15 years ago. So what I tell them is to look to see the surrounding community, to see if there as ways for them to plug in or to get involved and to volunteer as well. So that's one way. And also just to see the different student organizations on campus. For example, with students that I've worked with who are undocumented, they were able to reach out to the Dream Centers on campus. And that was very beneficial because they were able to find out about scholarship opportunities and financial aid that they might not have qualified otherwise for, but because there's Dream Centers on campus for undocumented students, they were able to connect with that faculty ahead of time and to be able to learn about scholarship opportunities that way. Let's see. Another question is, have you encountered students who underestimate the importance of cultural ethnic affinity groups or may not be personally familiar with the strains of PWIs? How do we help students work through what community connections or resources are most important to them? I actually haven't come across that yet. But what I do tell them about is my own college experience and going to a PWI and telling them what it was like being a student of color there. And you really, like, you can't tell that based off of looking at a website and seeing like what majors they offer and things like that. You won't really know until you go onto those college campuses. So that's why I really encourage them to go onto the college campuses or to find out what affinity groups are there, because then they're able to find out if they're able to really connect with those groups, and also to see if they're involved, if they can stay involved with those groups as well. And then also I just ask them what is important to them. Because like what's important to me as a person of color might not be important to them as a person of color. So for example, one of my students last year, we looked at, there was an organization that was like a minority organization that happened to be in the College of the Sciences. And so that really clicked for her. And so we were able to look to see what they do. And I think she's going to connect with them once she starts school in the fall. Let's see what else we have here. What strategies do you suggest for advisors who are white and middle-aged to build rapport with students of color? The information being shared is awesome, but how do I establish the trust that opens the students to work with me? No, that's a really great question. I can say, like, I know from my experience, a lot of my teachers and a lot of people that have advised me in the past have been white and middle-aged, and we have been able to build great rapport. I would just be a good listener, and that should be like for all of us, just to listen to see what's important to them. I would point out like different resources that are on campus, like looking to see what the Office of Diversity is doing, seeing what the Multicultural Center is doing, and pointing them to those organizations, just kind of like asking them questions, like for example, like let's say like you're working with a student that is a Black student, and just saying, you know, as they're applying for college, looking to see like what like diversity groups there might be, like just to see like if there are maybe like fraternities or sororities that are on campus that are NPHC, which is like the National Panhellenic of like basically it's like the college, the fraternities and sororities for Black students. So just having them look to see like if they do have those organizations on campus, along with like maybe there's a Black student union or there's some type of organization like that, just telling them to look and do that type of research and to see if there are any organizations that they feel like they can connect to once they enroll into that campus. So just looking at that, let's see. And another question we have is here is, what do you advise about taking out college loans? We heard this morning about great reluctance to do so. Yeah, that is something definitely that I know students have come across. And I know for myself, for grad school, I had to take out loans and I'm still paying them back. What I told my students to do is to look at it as like, yes, you do have to pay it back. And I know it sounds like a big debt, but one thing about education is that you'll never lose your education, unlike taking out a loan for a car or something like that, where, you know, eventually you're not going to be able to use that car. At least with education, you'll never lose it. So I always tell my students to do that and to not be discouraged by that as well. But I also tell them, and I've had these conversations, to be wise on how you're using your financial aid, because oftentimes when you're in the moment and you have that financial aid, you might want to spend it on things that aren't school related. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have to pay that back. So I always tell them to look into that as well, because that has been a challenge, I know, for a lot of people, and especially when you're in this demographic and you're trying to help out your families, and then also trying to get more money to get ahead. You don't want to put yourself in debt because you decided to buy something in college that you didn't necessarily need to buy in the first place. And so that is something that I've told them also. And so, yeah, are there any other questions before we end? Let's see, give you guys maybe like a couple more minutes. These are really great questions, by the way. Thank you. Okay, someone has really great, this is a comment. This individual, Susan, works in admissions for years. She said you can get great data from common data set. Okay, awesome. And sometimes it's buried in, and you can check out College Navigator. Thank you so much, Susan, for that. We can definitely look into that this year when we're advising. I'll give you guys a couple more minutes to ask any other questions that you're thinking about, and then we'll do the recap.
Hey, Brianna, the only thing I would just add in here to go along with Susan's point about where to find great data, Education Trust, if folks aren't familiar, is a great nonprofit policy organization that really does great and tremendous work on behalf of students, and they have a ton of data and a wealth of it, actually, where you can compare student outcomes, not only for graduation purposes, but also persistence purposes in subgroups. So if you're looking for, let's say, Latinx students and what their graduations rate looks like at a particular school, you can actually just literally go directly to the school and find that subset as long as it's being reported by the school. Education Trust, so if you just, it's college results actually is a tool that is used through the Education Trust. So if you just Google Education Trust and then go to their page and look for resources and tools, the tool itself is called College Results, and you can actually compare multiple schools against each other using that data set that they have. And actually the data is driven by the NCS, or National Center for Educational Statistics, and IPEDS, which is what schools report out every year or every other year for education purposes to the federal government.
Thanks so much, Nick, for that. Yeah, that's really great. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do the recap. Thank you guys so much for your questions. So again, first-gen students of color are unique because they're resilient and they face many challenges in college. And then again, there's many options for first-gen students of color to fund their college education. But again, as I mentioned, they might not be aware of all those opportunities, and that's where we come into play and we help them out. And then they should be exploring different majors, not just for upward mobility, but also for passion as well. And then student organizations can help this demographic out because they can feel like they belong more on campus and provide them a sense of community. And then lastly, the university's retention strategies will help ensure that they stay in college and graduate. So I want to thank you all so much for your time and for signing up for my session. And if you have any questions, you could feel free to reach out to me at my email address, which is briannanbennett@gmail.com. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the convening.